see any response from the PowerPoint slides, and it's hard to see if anybody is, there we go. Okay, so it is moving. All right, good. Okay, so we're going to, and I apologize again, we are going to, when you look at the agenda, the third-party landscape is changing. We have our traditional programs are just not built for this. They're built more for anti-corruption risks and more for sanctions risks. And now we have what I call technology risks, which are AI, cybersecurity, and the need for AI governance, and just a refresher on the two categories of third-party risk. And now, what do we need for due diligence? Obviously, it still has to include sanctions in particular, export controls, but FCPA and enforcement trends. And then how do we update our TPRM framework, and what should we be doing this year? So that's really some of the the critical issues that we need to take a look at. Hold on one second. Okay. So even in the sort of third-party risk management area, we've had major breaches in 2025 involving third parties. We have now what's going to be enforced in August is the new EU AI Act, which is something to look at. Here are your costs of data breaches, and of course FCPA actions that are tied to third parties. The old days of sort of due diligence questionnaires, periodic reviews, ongoing monitoring, we're in a new era of sort of dynamic, data-driven, and continuously monitoring third parties. And the need to do this is absolutely critical in terms of the sort of new enforcement parameters that are coming into play. So it's really important that we take a look at that. So the new landscape includes not only FCPA corruption, financial capabilities, sanctions, and OFAC, but AI and technology, cybersecurity, supply chain disruptions, but also supply chain reputation. And we've really seen, again, geopolitical instability rise as a sort of catalyst for change. And look, we used to do sort of a third-party traditional risk management through insurance verification for cybersecurity, baseline cybersecurity assessments. Even assuming you have IT at the table, the issue is, are you digging deep enough with regard to cybersecurity issues and potential problems? We always do financial stability checks, but again, that's something that should continue, but is not necessarily the end of the provision, the end of the process. And so now what we need to do is we need to screen our vendors who represent us, and we'll talk about that, in terms of, are they engaging in decision making that's based upon AI? Privacy framework, we obviously have to get a compliance evaluation with regard to policies and practices there, regulatory exposures, real-time monitoring, but we also have to make sure that our AI is accurate. AI is wrong many times, folks, and we need to do that. So again, once again, another message of paper systems are insufficient and ineffective, sending emails, getting written questionnaires, all of that has to be done through an automated platform these days. If you're not on an automated platform, the question is, when are you going to get it done? Because you better get it done ASAP. Because you can't even tackle these types of issues until you get on an automated program, for sure. Artificial intelligence is one of the reasons that I'm saying we need to redesign your program. Cybersecurity is something that some people take into account, have not had the IT people at the table for third-party due diligence purposes, but I am seeing more and more growth in that area, which is great. Data privacy is another area where you can be held liable, but your supply chain complexity is now becoming more and more of a risk, which means you not only have to know about your third parties, but you need to know about your fourth parties as well. So for cybersecurity, what vendor AI now is a new entry point, and API integrations of your vendors into your systems that can get access to your enterprise systems can become highly vulnerable, and requires that you have adequate cyber protections in place, and you need to know that your vendor does as well. And that's why I mentioned fourth party, fifth party blind spots in your supply chain where people can gain access to your system through the back door of vendors. Don't forget the famous Target case 15 years ago was because of an air conditioning vendor's vulnerability to cyber attack. Now we also need to take a look at our vendor contracts again, because there are contractual gaps that don't take into account AI, cybersecurity to the extent it should, and that we need to make sure that and data privacy issues are being covered in these gaps. In other words, we've had the standard anti-corruption, standard OFAC, sanctions, whatever, export controls, compliance with the laws. But now we need not just compliance with laws, but compliance with certain standards for our third parties as they come into the system. And the AI governance reality is people need to get on top of this issue. Right now, what I'm seeing and hearing is we have so much shadow AI use by employees that companies are not aware of, not controlling, and not making sure of. And right now, this vendor risk or using third parties who have AI access is complicating even the shadow employees who are using AI. It becomes an even bigger issue. So this is right now, vendor AI with employee AI are issues that have to be dealt with ASAP. So your traditional vendor management and procurement system was built for a different era. It now has to include AI inquiries, AI risk mitigation, training data and privacy compliance. Audit rights now over AI outputs and logs have to be made very clear in your contractual provisions. That's another area that's needed. And accuracy representations and warranties. Can you imagine this? Now we're going to have to get a vendor who's going to say, yes, the way we use AI, we're going to make sure that it's accurate. Well, boy, that can raise real tough issues because AI is not accurate all the time. And I just did a podcast on this, and I would urge you to listen to it because AI accuracy is a big problem. Continuous AI deployment monitoring. Many companies don't even know how many employees are using AI or how the company is using it. And AI-specific contractual risk mitigation situations are needed to be addressed as well. Now, let's remember the two categories of third-party AI risk. This is really important. You have to make this key distinction. I used to push this and tried to make sure people focused on this in the context of anti-corruption risk. And there's no doubt that this is a big, big issue in anti-corruption areas because we would always talk about third parties create risk when they act on your behalf. Those are the key words, acting on your behalf, meaning that they are creating legal liability for you. So if you had a distributor who's acting on your behalf and they engage in bribery, you could be held liable for it. That's not a ridiculous process because they're acting as an agent or a third-party representative for you. They're managing, let's say, customer relationships, bidding on projects, whatever, for you, acting for you. So then that situation, when a third party operates like that, there's legal liability risk. On the other hand, when they don't act on your behalf, and let me give you an example, a vendor sells you Pepsi, okay, and that vendor comes to you, they get put into your system, they just sell you sodas that are put into your soda machines. Well, they're not acting on your behalf, they're providing you goods or services, but do not act in the marketplace on your behalf. There's no direct legal exposure for their misconduct, be it AI, be it bribery, be it whatever. But that's where we look at the category of reputational risk. And reputational risk is not bound by some legal doctrine. It's basically, are you associating with somebody and doing a lot of business with somebody who's a bad character? And are they engaged in racial discrimination? And then people will say to you, well, why are you dealing with that person? Why are you conducting business with that person? You should be dealing with somebody else. So legal liability risk, and this is important in the AI area, okay? If a vendor acts on your behalf and uses AI in that process, that vendor's AI is acting like your agent, is acting like your third-party representative, and that AI can create liability for you, meaning discriminatory decision-making, false outputs that harm customers, or they violate applicable laws. That liability comes home to you. That's not the case when they act as a goods or services provider. And this is an important issue to be on top of and to keep track of, because that's the most important issue that you can look at in distinguishing, because then you craft and tailor your program for third-party risk management between these two categories. Your legal liability risk has to be measured and assessed based upon what kind of liability and how likely the occurrence of that liability is. And then you tailor your program to that. The parallel, and this is not, rocket science, as we say, this is a new area, yes, but we've been through this with the FCPA. And this doctrine will become pretty significant, and you're going to see case law that develops on this, but it's going to follow the parallel of agency law, which is when an agent acts on your behalf. So making sure that a vendor doesn't make discriminatory decisions in your name using AI, or if they have no AI governance whatsoever, or there's no accountability for their outputs. In other words, they're not reviewing them to make sure there's no human review to make sure it's accurate. And the weakest frameworks are going to get hit the hardest. That's exactly what we went through with the FCPA and third-party risk, where we had inadequate due diligence, where the company was held accountable for an agent acting on its behalf. And those companies that had no compliance programs were hit with the harshest penalties. And that's what you're going to see soon in this area as well. And who's bringing about this AI accountability? Well, obviously in the lower left-hand corner, we have the EU AI Act, and that is absolutely a significant issue with regard to its enforcement coming in August of 2026. We also have the EEOC, the CFPB, and the EEOC in particular for hiring decisions and AI that is used in human resources. Regardless of who built or deployed the tool, no AI vendor shield. In other words, you're going to be held liable if you have an AI vendor who's helping you with your HR issues and decisions. The CFPB, but more importantly, because the CFPB is kind of moribund, but the FTC with its are looking at enforcement on unfair and deceptive practices. And we're thinking now you may see DOJ and the SEC getting into this more as soon as we start to see cases where there are serious misleading statements, for example, made through AI or through an AI vendor, and that this could be seen as one of the reasons for misleading information being sort of propagated. And we'll obviously see, as DOJ and the SEC don't exercise certain things of their responsibilities, we could start to see as well the state AGs making some effort as well into this area. Okay. So what adequate third-party AI due diligence and cybersecurity due diligence requires is what AI is your vendor deploying in terms of the services they're providing? How are the tools trained and tested and monitored for accuracy and bias? What human oversight exists over AI outputs? And does their AI comply with employment, privacy, and consumer protection laws? And making sure you have audit rights over these contracts. Now, you can't go back and redo every contract. This is a process that has to start going forward. As renewals come up, as new vendors are brought on board, we need to update all of this to make sure that everything is working correctly. And then how does the vendor handle the AI model updates that come come about. There's updates that happen all the time with Claude or with ChatGPT, and how are we going to make sure that we are updating our system and our services that we are provided, and that our sort of compliance program is aware of it. So remember, incidental versus acting on behalf of vendors. And now we have to tailor and be put in place a proportionate system which is going to address these kinds of issues for the acting on behalf of. That's the thing, okay? That's the thing that we have to sort of follow and make sure that we're going to, make sure we do that. Okay. And so what do we look at for our acting on behalf of vendors? We have to do what are called, an enhanced due diligence of some sort. Whereas with the incidental vendors, it's really more of a baseline assessment, meaning what reputational risk can be hit in that situation. Where are they in the supply chain? How meaningful is the reputational risk? In other words, are they a minor vendor? Are they a significant vendor? Do we have a long-standing relationship with them? And what kind of interaction do we have with them? And so what kind of exposure do we have? On the acting on behalf of, we have to ask the question, how do you train and how do you make sure there's no bias if they're acting on your behalf, let's say in HR? If they're, what kind of human oversight and escalation procedures and controls do you have in place? And how are you getting to make sure that they're in compliance and they're using their AI in compliance with employment law requirements or data privacy? And obviously contractual audit rates, and you need notifications if there's a significant change of some sort. So we have to revisit these contracts. We do it at the time. We can't like redo these things. All of a sudden, let's just bring every vendor contract in. I mean, we have so many vendors that we have to just attack this as an issue going forward. And that means we have to use all of these sort of tools or checklists to make sure that there's disclosures, there's what are they doing for training, that their accuracy representations, incident notification, audit rights, and compliance obligations are covered by this new sort of dynamic that we're looking at. Now, we've already seen FCPA and corruption risks and third-party accountability, and I'm not going to go through all this because we've done lots and lots of webinars on this. We've seen lots and lots of third parties who get people in trouble, but this obviously still has to be a part of your risk mix. We can't just jettison this, but we've already built this system and put this in place, and we've done that with sanctions, which we're going to talk about in a minute, though, because of what is going on in that area. Third-party screening in the AI area now is, and sanctions enforcement, we're seeing more AI tools used in the screening process itself, in the risk management process itself, and this again raises liability issues with regard to your vendors, because your vendor is providing an important service to make sure that you stay in compliance. They're not acting on your behalf, though. And this is, again, a reputational risk, but this is a weird situation because in this sense of their failure to provide adequate protections, human error here could lead to you then making an error, which leads then again to leading to an enforcement matter, an OFAC investigation where you're dealing with an SDN and you didn't know it. Speaking of which, and I want to take a moment just to talk about a recent case and what it means now for third-party red flags with regard to sanctions. This is I've written about this. I did a podcast on it. There's a video on Volkov Law TV right now that talks about this because this is an important case. The Adani $275 million settlement that just occurred is important because what the government does is lays out exactly what the red flags were and the failure of Adani to address the red flags. And they had 4 categories of warnings and 4 categories of red flags. So essentially, Adani is buying LPG, liquid gas, liquid petroleum gas shipments, and from a Dubai supplier. And if you've listened to me enough, you know that I say anything that goes through Dubai is connected to Iran. That's just the transshipment point. It's the point where we've seen more and more violations go through. And lo and behold, they're buying lots and lots. They bought 35 shipments over almost a 2-year period, or maybe an 18-month period, from a Dubai supplier who claimed that the LPG came from Oman or Iraq. However, there were red flags. And the red flags, let's go through them. And this absolutely shows you that if they're red flags that you don't address in documentation, because what happened in the Adani case is they were aware of these red flags. They talked about them, but they did nothing to document a resolution of them, and they really didn't want to know what the answers were. So let's go through the 4 categories. On at least 4 occasions, Adani received allegations from other people, from third parties, that the cargoes were from Iran. They dismissed them as competitor interference and continued purchasing. One warned vessel was accepted, and then they bought 2 more cargoes from the same vessel. So that you had third-party warnings that came in from competitors or customers or whatever, people in the marketplace. And you can't just dismiss it as competitor interference. Number 2, vessel behavior and weird shipping patterns. Vessels operated with classic red flags as to a shadow fleet. They turned off their ASI systems, which is the tracking system that's used on vessels, so you can see where any vessel is in the world. And they extended dark periods. They had spoofing of fake AIS data. There were routes that made no sense. In other words, they made weird stops or they went over places. And there were frequent ownership and flag changes. When you see these things, you're looking at a shadow fleet. And a majority of the vessels were subsequently designated. But Adani did not monitor the vessel behavior. Third, documentation anomalies. Certificates of origin had illogical non-sequential numbering, post-shipment delays in document issuance, outdated templates. So this is, for example, one of the shipments was from Sahar, Oman, which doesn't even have the capability to export infrastructure, having the infrastructure to handle LPG exports. And last but not least, but one that is really interesting to me, is the price was too good to be true. The supplier offered discounted LPG from the Middle East, and it was a discount for obvious reasons, because it was coming from Iran, and they needed to get rid of it as fast as possible. And it was too good to be true, and OFAC said so explicitly. So that's an important warning sign as we're dealing with sanctions right now and a tough sanctions environment. This is something that needs to be looked at, and you need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that this is something that is that's going on your focus in terms of red flags. Document the red flags and how you resolve them. So the signal's clear. We have obviously FCPA third-party focus. We've had OFAC record enforcement. Well, and I think this year is going to be a big year again with the $275 million Adani settlement, and there are other cases that are coming. And we have AI discrimination enforcement, and we're about to have the EU AI Act enforcement coming as well. DOJ's standards apply just as well now, today, in 2026 as they did in 2023 or even earlier in terms of what are the standards for your third-party risk program. One, it has to be integrated into procurement, distribution, and the sales side, and your vendor management processes. And it has to vary by risk, obviously, and there has to be an assessment of the qualifications and relationships, the business rationale, and all your mitigation steps, be it contract provisions, invoicing controls, payment documentation, certifications, training, code of conduct acknowledgement. All of these principles still apply in the AI context. You have to have an AI use policy, and your third parties have to adhere to that just as much as they have to adhere to other policies that you maintain. So these standards apply with sort of equal force to whatever needs to be done in this area. So building a modern, defensible third-party framework. Again, we use the same principles, but we need to layer in a sort of AI governance part to this whole issue. First is we look at a risk-based tiering system, which has to include AI deployment or AI use by the third party. In other words, is the third party going to be using AI to act on your behalf? And if they are going to do that, then that raises the need for a more intensive risk review and risk tailoring, and they should be on the higher side of your risk ranking system. So acting versus incidental has to be included in that. It's already sort of incorporated in your third-party system with regard to, let's say, corruption risks. When you ask, the third party, are you going to interact with the foreign government, a foreign government on our behalf, or are some of your owners government-owned, government officials? And if that's true, then that raises other issues. But you see, in the same way that we are asking that question for FCPA purposes, we need to be asking that question for AI deployment. Are you going to be using AI to act on our behalf? And then we have an automated screening platform of some sort, and we have to start to get into looking at where this company is, this third party is. Adverse media reporting is going to be important. Obviously, we screen for sanctions. We screen for, let's say, prior corruption scandals, things like that, and government ownership. And we're going to be looking at other types of risks that may come up in terms of, are they under investigation for their employment practices? Have they been sued for their employment practices? These are going to be important if, let's say, they're providing you AI for your human resources functions. And we need, obviously, to know about the governance program that they have in terms of AI inventory. Now, I listed here AI-specific questionnaires. What I mean by that is questions that are directed at how they use AI and to make sure if they're using it, what kind of use is it, as we've talked about. And we're also going to have continuous monitoring that has to continue with regard to this. But the AI governance layer has to be included in this. It should be in terms of your program and building your modern and defensible third-party framework. This is going to be a huge risk, and it is already, but it's going to become larger and larger as we go along. So one is, first off, like anything else, how much AI is out there being used by your third parties. So we first have to start with an inventory of as much as we can of any AI systems that are touching our operations. And we need to do that almost through an internal survey. How to the extent we're using vendors in your, let's say, department or whatever, in your function, how much of that is with the assistance of AI through the vendors. So do you use AI in performing services? And some kind of, and I know I said we can't go and take a look at every contract, but in those contracts or those services where we know for a fact that there is AI and it's being used on our behalf, those are the ones to go and get and start to look at preparing supplements, just like we did years and years ago with supplements on anti-corruption. And the more that we can inventory our vendor systems and our vendor integrations, IT can be very helpful in this process for obvious reasons. And we want to make sure that our vendor products, we can get, updated materials with regard to vendor products that we're using with regard to AI as well. And then we're going to, so we have to discover, and then we have to classify who are our high-risk AI vendors, who are our medium risk, low risk. An AI, like a medium risk to me in this situation, could be somebody that uses, let's say they use AI in a function on our behalf, but it may be a very relatively minor function as opposed to hiring decisions. Or credit decisions, or anything where it's an algorithmic use. And so we need to use this classification as a way to sort of start to carve up our vendor base, just like we did with regard to FCPA. And who has the regulatory nexus? Are they in the EU, operating in the EU? Are we operating in the United States? Where's our regulatory nexus? And then we're going to have to monitor any changes, not any changes in their AI system. Let's say they update, they put a new system in, they go to another AI provider. So we need to know all of those sorts of things, and we have to monitor, and we have to make sure our contracts include provisions for them to inform us of their any changes in their AI system. Okay, so this is sort of step one in understanding your use and your exposure with regard to your third parties. So we identify, again, we have an onboarding due diligence process. We have and this is going to be hopefully through an automated program, and we're going to have a contract or at least some type of legal representations that are made and monitoring, and then obviously we could terminate or whatever, renew or not renew. And again, we're going to have some of the usual roles that are played. We're going to have a business sponsor who obviously wants to engage this vendor and will be responsible for interacting with the vendor in this process. And that could be also with the assistance of procurement and IT. Compliance and legal obviously is responsible for, ultimately, they have to have a right to approve and to hold up a deal unless all the requirements are met. Internal audit will, of course, hopefully monitor, test the program as we're going along, and obviously the board committees and the audit committee will probably hear about this as well. Now, using data analytics and AI in our own program, And this is where we can use it ourselves in the management and identification of this risk. So for example, we can use AI and data analytics for risk scoring. And I've seen really good systems for doing this. And I think it's something to really take a look at. Picking out anomalies in transactions. It was funny, but I was doing a risk assessment with a company, and I asked them about AI, and they say, "Oh, we don't have any AI. We have a governance committee. We're taking a look at it, but we're not sure exactly where we're going to deploy it." Then I'm talking to the finance department, and I say, "What do you think about AI?" And they said, "Oh, we're already using it." I said, "Well, that's funny. Nobody else knows that you're using it, but how are you using it?" For anomaly detection in transaction monitoring. So very common use in finance and very helpful, and can be very helpful. And then we have network analysis of certain, beneficial ownership, corporate relationships. All of this can be done with the help of AI and data analytics, questionnaire analytics, AI-assisted analysis. You can set up a pretty sophisticated AI system for reviewing data and reviewing questionnaires and reviewing all of this, and also looking for adverse media monitoring. It's really interesting because the AI capability to sift information that you generate through your third-party risk program can be very, very helpful in terms of what you're doing. Again, we have to double check the accuracy of what we're doing and making sure everything is working appropriately. Now, your supply chain risk, it continues to be a difficult area, and we usually just focus on our first tier vendors, but now we're getting into second, third tier, and beyond. And for example, let's say in forced labor, you may get into a forced labor inquiry. You could be into a third tier and beyond in terms of raw materials that are coming into your supply chain that are then formed as well. And we had a very complex case a while ago involving steel manufacturing, and it involved China. And you can imagine how many tiers you had to go down to the raw materials, the smelting centers, and the country risk that's involved, and working your way back. And this is almost like what's becoming commonplace is what we did in the conflict mineral area is now required almost on a much broader scale in terms of understanding your third-party risk and the geopolitical risk as well as the regulatory risk. We also have to, and here again, the principles of red flags and identifying red flags. And notice in the Adani case, these were pretty basic red flags that they ignored. And here, this is just a reminder of all of the red flags that can come up. There are so many, and the importance of triggering some kind of escalation. But the AI vendor, let's say a vendor refuses to give you training data or model architecture about its AI systems, that's going to be a problem, and they're going to have to disclose that information. Also, when you ask a vendor and you say, look, we need to know, how do you ensure you're using AI? How do you ensure data privacy laws are followed? And particularly with the handling of personal data. And there you go. And they say, no, we don't, we'll certify we're in compliance and whatever, but you need to know more. You need to know more. So the urgency can't be overstated, that's for sure. This is the purpose in doing this webinar, is to remind everybody that since we have this new AI, cybersecurity, all these technology issues, this is where we need to bring our resources I'm not saying that FCPA is unimportant, but sanctions is critical, and third-party risks and sanctions are huge, as you know. But we need to get at this issue, and we need to move and adjust ourselves towards this issue. And so when weak, as we always say, when weak governance meets enforcement, that's where you get the harshest outcomes. And that's why I'm saying if you build a system that operates effectively, you're going to minimize your risk operationally, and God forbid you get into a situation where it's an enforcement problem. The more governance you can show, the more compliance you can show, the better your result will be. And please don't forget, these other risks are reputational risks. And I mentioned forced labor and supply chain. We have environmental violations, human rights due diligence from the EU. And obviously we have AI and algorithmic bias. But these are all issues that need to be taken into account with regard to your new third party or your 2.0. Now, an optimistic practical plan. If we can get, for example, just even the first 30 days done in the next 90 days, that would be great. I know it's hard to get these things done. This is an optimistic plan, but this is an action plan. And it means that you need to know what AI you have. You need to start to distinguish between acting and incidental vendors, and you need to focus on the higher risk ones. You have to bring management and the board up to date on this, and let them know that this is going to be something that has to be addressed and defended, and you're going to have to build due diligence questions, not a whole questionnaire, but adding to your questionnaire to the extent you have one already on an automated platform. And your goal here is going to be to get first, what's the nature of the problem, how big of an issue do we have, and how are we going to address this, and building support for addressing it and making sure you can get through this okay. And don't forget your 10 elements of your modern third-party risk management program is going to have much of the same, and you'll notice much of the same principles that we've always talked about in terms of policies and procedures. You're going to have to update your third-party risk management program and policies and procedures with regard to AI and technology risks. And obviously, peppered throughout each of the steps here is AI and technology issues that need to be addressed, and making sure they're reflected in your governance documents and your controls are updated to reflect all of this. So it sounds like a Herculean task at this moment, but it isn't when you start to dig into it, because it's not as big a deal. It's not like starting from scratch. You've done this before and you know how to do this, and so it's going to be something that can be done. So now, in terms of measuring your program effectiveness, you're going to have to figure out what percentage of your vendors have been sort of covered or reviewed, and that are basically getting pushed through the new control atmosphere, the new control set. And monitoring metrics and AI-specific metrics and incident metrics are going to be important. The AI-specific metrics are going to be really important in terms of monitoring your system and making sure that it's working effectively. In other words, how many AI vendors are filling out the questionnaire or asking those questions, being asked those questions. Okay, folks, well, sorry for the snafu there in the beginning. Please let me know if you need some help in this area. We would love it. If you have any questions or anything like that, please let me know. We are always, we have a few minutes here before we head out. But if anyone has any questions, we'd love to hear from you right now. And if you do need help on any issues, please let us know. We'd be happy to help in any way that we can. And I got one question here that came in. How do we ensure AI related diligence findings are reflected in enforceable contract terms, not just risk memos? And that's a great question. Thank you for that. And the way you do that is, if, for example, there is a, let's say you have found out that they use AI in that, then what you do, I think, is you have in, let's say, providing a service on your behalf, then I think you have to write it just like in terms of FCPA. You write a contractual provision that's going to incorporate the same issue, that, in other words, they're in compliance with AI regulatory and legal and regulatory requirements. Let's say they use it to make decisions for you. Then you say, okay, that it's not used in a discriminatory manner, there's no bias, all of that. And we're starting to write provisions in this area, and it's actually pretty interesting because it really depends upon the AI use that you have in that system, or in that particular whatever use case that you're doing. Any other questions? Since we have a little bit of time, that was a great question. Thank you for that. Let's see. Nope, I don't have any others. And again, please let me know if you do need a copy of the slides. Please let me know, and I can send it to you. mvolkoff@volkofflaw.com. Keep us in mind for, obviously, your third-party management risk management programs, but obviously lots of other areas in trade compliance as well. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, I'll get the technology down a little bit better next time as well. But thank you so much, and stay in touch. mvolkoff@volkofflaw.com. Thanks again.